Hey folks, welcome to another episode. Today's episode will be dedicated to my friend Alan Tabora. And I'm hoping by the end of this episode, folks will remember that refugees come to our country risking their lives because they truly have dangerous conditions that they are fleeing from. We can't forget that this is a country of immigrants, and some of our earliest immigrants were refugees. For example, the Pilgrims. They were labeled separatists in England because they were going away from the Church of England, and they came here because they faced danger because of their religious beliefs. Another great example is Albert Einstein. He fled Nazi Germany and sought refuge here in America. Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State under Nixon and Ford, also fled Nazi Germany with his family in 1938 and became a U.S. citizen in 1943. Gloria Estefan fled Cuba with her family after Fidel Castro took power. Her father had been a bodyguard for former President Fulgencio Batista, and they felt their lives would be in danger if they stayed behind. Madeleine Albright, former U.S. ambassador to the UN and the first female Secretary of State, was a refugee from the Czech Republic as her parents fled the Nazi regime. Her parents, unbeknownst to her at the time, had converted from the Jewish faith to Catholicism. Let's not forget Ellis Island, an immigration station that processed millions of refugees. From 1892 to 1954, over 12 million immigrants, not visitors, immigrants, passed through Ellis Island. Over 1 million entered in 1907 alone. Was it a very difficult process? Not really. Most did not even require a passport, let alone a visa. And so before they departed their country, they were given what's called a travel manifest, which listed their name, date of birth, occupation, and destination. This would be the most important document for the officials at Ellis Island. Thousands would line up every day to be processed, and doctors would briefly check the applicants to make sure they didn't have any obvious and undesirable diseases. 90% of people made it through this phase without any problems. Those suspected of having medical issues were sent to a brief detention room where doctors would examine them further. After more thorough medical inspections, most were cleared. Those that were not were to remain in detention until their medical issues had been resolved. After the medical inspection, an immigration officer would examine your travel manifest. Most people did not have a problem accurately answering basic personal information. Those that gave suspect answers, however, were detained until their issues could be resolved, such as having some money wired to them or being able to provide a correct destination address here in the United States. In total, only about 2% of the people passing through Ellis Island were rejected. It was a system truly designed to weed out the most undesirable and to let everyone else who qualified back in. And qualified just meant that you could tell your name and your address and you didn't have some crazy disease and you weren't a terrorist or an international criminal. Not a very high bar. So what happened from then until now? Why are things so different, and why do people have such a different perspective of the immigrants coming in today? Oh, perhaps it's because the immigrants back in those days were highly educated. Yeah, right. Yes, there were some people highly educated. Yes, there were some wealthy people, but the vast majority were not, and many of them actually were illiterate in their native language. Well, because our labor market now is so much more saturated than it was back then, and so we don't need immigrant labor as much as we did back then. Are you sure about that?
Aware of the need for agricultural workers, Jerry Spencer turned to unemployed Americans, but says after 2 weeks, most couldn't cope.
The farmer says, start over here and end over here. And that was the extent of their instructions. With the American workers, they all had to be taught all this and separate. And in addition to the fact that their bodies just were not.
There you go.
You.
You have a blessed day, okay?
All right.
But for many business owners, the law has left a bitter taste.
You have to have a plan set up for that to take place. It's no different than the bills, healthcare bill and stuff like that. Nothing can be replaced unless you really have a long set up process for the next thing to take hold. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to get rid of these people and then look at the farmers that are left without workers.
We have farmers not planting acreage because of the lack of labor. We have farmers who are missing market windows because they can't get their fruit or their vegetables picked at the peak season because of a lack of labor. But if we want fresh fruits and vegetables in our stores, you're going to have labor, hand labor, that's going to go out and harvest those because it takes a tremendous amount of care. If we don't have the labor, then we can't harvest those fresh fruits and vegetables everybody's come to expect.
Let's just be clear that immigrants are coming to this country because of our thirst for this workforce.
Carola Bracco runs Neighbors Link.
They are taking on jobs that often complement the workforce that was born in this country because of the fact that they're willing to do these jobs.
So now we have hundreds of thousands of people, mostly from Central America, fleeing very dangerous conditions to come to the United States to start over. How is this different from hundreds of thousands of white Europeans fleeing dangerous conditions to come to the United States to start over? Oh, but they're terrorists. Really? Tell me the last time a Central American crossed the border and committed a terrorist attack here on the US soil. Do you remember how the 9/11 guys got on those planes? With student visas. They went through the process, they were able to trick US government officials, and they got visas and came here on a plane. These people are risking their lives, and there is a reason for them to do so. Oh, but those people are just coming here to game the system and for economic opportunities. They're not really afraid of their home countries. Right. So let's ignore the fact that El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala have been overrun by powerful gangs who have become quasi-political forces in their countries and who kill, maim, and torture indiscriminately. Most police officers are bought off, and the ones brave enough to stand up to these forces simply do not have enough resources to eradicate them and to effectively protect their citizens from gang threats and violence. So let me now tell you about my friend Alan Tabora. Alan fled Honduras and its dangerous conditions when he was 15 years old. He made the dangerous journey, including getting on top of speeding trains, and he managed to come to the US border and he crossed without inspection. He came alone as he was largely neglected by his mother in Honduras. And so alone, vulnerable, afraid, and very susceptible to all kinds of temptations, he fell with the wrong crowd. And so one day, these geniuses, they decide to engage in a robbery. And so they pick out a victim who was walking. One of them has a gun, points the gun at the victim, and they have Alan go up to the victim and grab the cell phone. Alan did so. No violence, but the person was under coercion and threat of grave bodily harm by Alan's friend. Was this a horrible thing he did? Of course it was. Did it scar the victim for possibly the rest of his or her life? Yes, probably. But we also have to look at the circumstances. As prosecutors, don't we look at the well-being of everyone involved? You look at the circumstances, the age of the offender, and then you do something that is just, that satisfies the ends of our society and our prosecutorial thirst, and also the ends of mercy. Well, apparently not, because apparently the redneck judge and prosecutors in Florida, in that case, they decided that it would be a good idea, notwithstanding all the factors I just described, to give him not 1, but 5 years in prison. And as a defense attorney, I'm asking myself, where was that guy's defense attorney? In what universe does a semi-competent defense attorney allow their client with no priors, a minor, and where the circumstances did not actively involve physical violence, to get a sentence of 5 years right off the bat? But that's exactly what happened to Alan. And he would spend the rest of his teenage years in prison, where in his environment, he was exposed to the most enlightening and positive individuals that really helped him become a wonderful and productive human being in our society. Right. However, something interesting happened before his arrest. He met a woman named Segunda, and Segunda started to take an interest in Alan's life and to try to help him in some way. And so when he was arrested, she continued to visit him, and she said that she kind of adopted him. She would refer to him as her son. And Alan, never really having that mother's love, he embraced that as well. So Segunda became his mother and visited him during the 5 years that he was incarcerated. It's really a beautiful story. And so I met these great human beings when Alan got what's called an immigration detainer. That means that his criminal sentence was about to be up, but he would not be released after serving that sentence. Instead, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, would take control and custody of Alan because they were going to place him in removal proceedings in immigration court to determine whether or not he could remain in the United States following his criminal sentence. So in preparation of his case, I visited Alan several times in jail, and I remember just really liking this guy. To me, he was still a kid, even though he was 21, and we would crack jokes, and I enjoyed being around him. And I remember asking myself, what's the difference between me and this guy? Because he is innately a good person. Well, I think the difference was I got lucky. I had good parents. I had an upbringing. I didn't have to hop on some trains to get here through the border. We came on a plane. Things were easier for me. So as I was preparing his asylum case, I found out that Alan had been threatened by gangs. They threatened his life because he refused to join them. And even 5 years after leaving his country, he was still petrified of going back. Honduras is a very small country, and word gets around very fast, especially about people who have been deported back to Honduras. Plus, with social media, it's definitely very easy to find out when your target has returned to your country. We prepared a very compelling case to show exactly why Alan's fear was reasonable, and we even hired a country condition expert to really prove this to the judge. We were ready to go to trial. Before I go on, it'll help you if I give you a very brief primer on asylum law. So for asylum, you have to prove that you were persecuted or will be persecuted because of your race, your religion, your nationality, meaning you're in a country but you consider yourself different, like the Tibetans or the people in Xinjiang in China, because of your political opinion, and because you're a member in a particular social group. The particular social group, or PSG category, is the most flexible and malleable one, which was intended to be applied broadly to help people whose situation didn't necessarily fit within the first 4 categories. And so some PSGs that we've been able to help, for example, have been homosexuals, have been people who were very Americanized and were returning to their country and are going to be robbed and possibly kidnapped, etc. We've helped a woman who could not bear a son for her Chinese husband, and she was being persecuted by the family, as well as many domestic violence victims. And so Alan's particular social group was that he was a young man from Honduras who had refused to join a gang and therefore had been threatened because of it. This was a viable PSG for many years. However, right before his trial, the Board of Immigration Appeals, they come out with a new precedent specifically saying that people in gang-related cases or claims do not have a viable PSG. This was clearly against precedent, and it was clearly a political move because they simply did not want people like Alan in our country. And so we went to trial knowing that the odds would be stacked against us, but we were trying to make arguments to distinguish his situation from the precedent case law. But unfortunately, right off the bat, the judge and the prosecutor, they were very much against him. And I couldn't believe what they did. They actually went on to discredit our country condition expert because they wanted to deny him so bad and not have anything on the record that could be appealable. They discredited the expert witness and says that she didn't have enough experience in Honduras, etc. And they proceeded to deny the case. Now, under immigration law, Alan's criminal conviction is considered what's called an aggravated felony. And so that does limit some of the protection he's able to receive. However, he is eligible for something called Convention Against Torture. They simply can keep him if they feel that he's going to be tortured when he returns to his home country. But they just weren't having it. I don't know why, but the judge and the prosecutor, they were just looking at him and the clown tattoos he got in jail so he could be protected and all these things. They just really wanted him out of the country. So as I was sitting next to him and he's in an orange jumpsuit, I said, Alan, so your case has been denied. There's this bad case law from the BIA, but I think it's possible the federal circuit courts will disagree, and I think we can possibly distinguish your case. I think the judge erroneously discredited the witness that came on your behalf. I think we should appeal. Let's hang in there and let's appeal. At least something will happen. And he says, Felipe, I'm tired, man. I've been at this for 5 years. I just want to go home. And I pleaded with him. I said, I think we can make something happen. Just hang in there. But there was no convincing him. He just wouldn't budge. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to appeal. He was tired. He wanted to go home. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time, and happy to say the last time, that I openly cried in court. And what drove me to tears, and this was in front of the judge and prosecutor, and they're looking at me like, okay. And I couldn't stop bawling. And this was because, one, I realized that the difference between me and Alan were circumstances. I had it good. I had good parents. I had a good upbringing. I had a safe environment, and he didn't have any of those things. And two, I genuinely believed that he was afraid to go back. I genuinely believed in the asylum case that we presented, and I was worried for his safety. But Alan turns to me and he says, everything's going to be okay, Felipe. I'm finally going to be able to get out of here. I'm going to go home. I'm going to keep in touch with Segunda. It's going to be okay. And so I was very disappointed. I really wish, what could I have done? He did not want to appeal. I wasn't able to convince him to appeal. It was very frustrating to know that we lost that case. It's a case that could have been won. We've won very, very similar cases. It was very frustrating. But I had other clients, other cases, and I moved on. And I think I kept in touch with Segunda a little bit, and off we went. Until I get an email from Segunda. There was no text, there was just something written on the subject line. And it says, "Thank you so much for fighting for Alan. Unfortunately, yesterday, he was murdered in Honduras." This thing sent me on a black hole, man. I could see this guy and me laughing with him and us in court, and he was gone. He was gone for the reasons that we're pleading the judge to let him stay. It was really tough. And my wife helped me. She says, look, you're like a doctor. Sometimes doctors, they will lose people, but your clients need you. Because before then, I started to question why I was doing what I was doing and questioning my competence. And it was a really, really tough moment. But just thinking about the clients that still needed me was what kept me going. It also taught me that you have to forgive yourself sometimes. You're not always going to be perfect. I think to this day, what could I have done? But Alan didn't want to appeal. If I could go to heaven and kind of strangle him a little bit. But it's really frustrating. But you have to forgive yourself. You have to move on because there are other people in your life who are going to need your help at this time. But folks, I tell this story, one, to keep Alan's memory alive. I didn't even see an article about this or an obituary, nothing. It was as if he was born and he was taken away and without a trace. So this is why I wanted to make this video, but also to remind people that the plight of these refugees is very much real. There are dangerous conditions in their home countries. People don't walk thousands of miles and risk their lives just for kicks. And since I'm making this video for Alan, I guess I'll talk to Alan for a little bit. Alan, ¿cómo está, hombre? ¿Todo bien? Espero que esté bien ahí y bastante feliz y creciendo. Y mira, usted sabe que hicimos todo para luchar para usted. ¿Cómo no apelaste, coño? Y siento mucho, miembro, por lo que sucedió. Gracias por nos dar paz en nuestro corazón, en mi corazón y también de Segunda. Y espero que usted esté bien ahí con oportunidades de crecer y aprender. Y quiero que sepa que hay mucha gente aquí en la tierra que le extraña mucho, ¿ok? Hombre, un abrazo. So I understand the argument that we are saturated and we can't help everyone. I totally get that. But I think we have a moral obligation and a legal obligation under international law, which we had decided to adopt in the Immigration and Nationality Act, to help as many people as we can as the resources allow, because these people are fleeing hell. Most of them are not coming here to game the system. Thank you for watching this episode. I realize this one was a little somber, but it's also an issue that's very dear to my heart, and I want to continue raising awareness of this. Yes, there's a crisis. There's a humanitarian crisis. People are fleeing very dangerous conditions. I admire the current administration for wanting to invest in those countries to make life better and safer, and that way less people are going to want to come over here. Thanks again for watching and for supporting, and I'll see you at the next episode.